Ethan Cole thought Willow Valley was just another quiet town, a place to fix broken engines, to silence the echoes of war, and to live out his days with his loyal German shepherd, Rex. But one afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the fields, Rex heard something no one else did. A woman's scream carried on the wind. When Ethan followed, he found a young widow and her son being attacked outside their home. The moment he stepped between them and the men in black, everything changed. They weren't just victims. They were standing on land a powerful corporation would kill to control, a land hiding a secret buried beneath the lake since the war. Now Ethan and Rex must face corruption, betrayal, and the ghosts of their own past to protect what's pure. Because sometimes a single act of courage can awaken faith, heal old wounds, and remind us that even in the darkest valley, God still works His miracles. What happens next will move you to tears and make you believe again. Before we begin, please support this story by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. And may God bless everyone watching tonight. Early afternoon sunlight stretched long across the rolling fields of Willow Valley, turning every stalk of barley into a blade of gold. The air smelled faintly of oil and cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor coughed and sputtered, then fell silent again. Inside a small wooden garage at the edge of his property, Ethan Cole knelt beside an aging Massey Ferguson tractor, its red paint faded to rust and dust. He was 45, broad-shouldered but lean, his face marked by years of sun and wind, and by something harder, memory. A jagged scar traced the edge of his left eyebrow, disappearing into the short brown-gray of his hair. When he worked, he moved with quiet precision, every motion deliberate. The garage smelled of oil and iron, and from its doorway the view opened onto miles of wind-swept fields. A radio sat on the shelf beside a jar of nails, playing old country songs too softly to sing along. Rex, his 7-year-old German shepherd, lay near the open door, tail flicking lazily as he watched the wind ripple across the grain. The dog's sable coat shimmered with shades of gold and black, his eyes amber and alert even in rest. Ethan often joked that Rex was the only one who truly listened, but in truth, he didn't talk much to anyone else these days. He wiped his hands on a rag, checked the oil again, then leaned back with a quiet sigh. "We'll get another season out of her yet, partner," he said. Rex's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. The rhythm of his life had become a study in quiet repetition. Mornings fixing machines, afternoons walking the fields, evenings sitting on the porch, while Rex watched the horizon. After 15 years in the Army, 2 tours overseas, 1 too many funerals, Ethan had learned that silence could be both a refuge and a punishment. He'd come back to Willow Valley because it was the only place that hadn't changed while everything else had. Beyond the far fence line stood the Whitfield farm, a modest spread of white siding and red barns. Ethan could see the roof glinting from where he worked. Sarah Whitfield, the widow who owned it, was in her late 30s. Tall, slender, her long auburn hair often tied in a braid that fell over one shoulder. Her face had a quiet strength to it, though her eyes carried a hint of exhaustion that no sleep could cure. She'd been running the farm alone since her husband Daniel died 5 years earlier in what the papers called a workplace explosion. Her 13-year-old son, Noah, helped where he could, skinny and bright-eyed, always chasing after Rex when they visited. Ethan had never been one for small talk, but he'd helped Sarah a few times over the years, fixing a broken pump, hauling a trailer, mending fences. She always thanked him with that same half-smile, warm but careful, as if she'd learned not to expect help from anyone for long. At 2 in the afternoon, the wind shifted. It carried a smell Ethan hadn't noticed before, smoke, faint but acrid, like burned rubber. Rex lifted his head, ears pricking forward. Ethan straightened, scanning the horizon. The Whitfield house sat quiet in the sunlight, nothing out of place. But Rex stood up now, every muscle tense. "What is it?" Ethan asked, but the dog was already moving. First a low growl, then a sudden burst of motion. He sprinted out of the garage, paws kicking dust as he tore down the dirt path toward the Whitfield property. "Rex!" Ethan shouted, but the wind stole the sound. He dropped the wrench, grabbed his jacket, the rugged work coat of tan-brown canvas he'd worn since his army days, and followed, boots pounding against the ground. The valley stretched wide and still, except for the blur of the dog running ahead. Halfway across the field, he stopped. The air was wrong now, still smoky, but with something sharper underneath. He caught faint echoes, raised voices, the crack of something hitting wood, then a shout, a woman's voice, high and desperate. "Sarah!" Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He vaulted the fence, boots sinking into the mud on the other side, and broke into a run. His breath came in sharp bursts, the years of discipline pushing his body forward before his mind could think. The old instincts, the ones he thought he'd buried with his uniform, were awake again. The Whitfield house came into view at the top of the rise. The porch light hung crooked, even though it was daytime. Rex was there already, barking furiously near the front steps. Through the glare of sunlight, Ethan could make out shapes. 3 men in dark jackets standing too close to Sarah, who was shielding Noah behind her. One of them held a metal pipe. "Sign it, lady," one shouted, "or we'll come back when your boy's not here." Sarah shook her head, her voice trembling but defiant. "You can tell your boss I don't sell. This land was my husband's." The man laughed and took a step forward. That was when Rex lunged. The sound of his snarl ripped through the quiet afternoon like thunder. The man spun, startled, just as Ethan reached the porch. "Back off," Ethan said, voice flat, controlled, the tone of someone who had given orders before. All 3 men turned toward him. One sneered. "This your business, old man?" Ethan didn't answer. He stepped forward, the weight of his stare enough to make one of them hesitate. Rex stood beside him now, hackles up, low growl vibrating through his chest. The man with the pipe swung it toward him. Ethan sidestepped, caught his wrist and twisted, the motion clean, efficient. The pipe clattered to the floorboards. He drove his shoulder into the second man's ribs, sending him sprawling. The third one backed away, cursing, then bolted for their truck parked by the road. Ethan picked up the dropped pipe and slammed it once against the porch rail. "Tell whoever sent you," he said. "Next time, they'll need more than threats." The man hesitated, eyes wide, then ran after his friend. Their truck roared to life and fishtailed down the dirt road, leaving a spray of dust and gravel in its wake. For a moment, the only sounds were the wind and Sarah's ragged breathing. Noah clung to her side, trembling. Ethan lowered the pipe, his pulse slowing. "You all right?" Sarah nodded shakily. I think so." Her hands still trembled as she held Noah close. Rex sniffed at her leg, tail wagging once before he sat at Ethan's heel, eyes scanning the empty road. Ethan followed his gaze. The truck was gone, but in the mud by the porch steps the tire tracks were fresh, and on the side of the road lay a scrap of metal torn from the bumper. Faded letters glimmered through the grime. Redwood Energy Corp. Sarah saw it too. "They've been sending letters," she whispered. "Said they wanted to buy the land around the lake. When I refused, they started showing up." Ethan bent to pick up the metal piece, turning it over in his hand. The edges were sharp, the paint fresh. "You call the sheriff?" She shook her head. "Last time I did, nothing happened." Ethan looked at her. Really looked. The dirt on her cheek, the thin line of fear still lingering in her eyes, the way she held Noah like he was all she had left. Then he glanced down at Rex, who was watching him silently, waiting for a decision. "All right," he said quietly. Then I'll stay until they get the message." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what would have happened if—" He raised a hand. "Don't thank me. Thank him." She looked down at Rex, who tilted his head as if embarrassed by the attention. Her lips curved into a small, trembling smile. As Ethan turned back toward his truck, the clouds thickened overhead, dimming the gold of the afternoon. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured, a warning, maybe, or a promise. And behind them, in the fading light, the valley felt suddenly smaller, as if the storm wasn't just coming from the sky, but from something deeper, buried beneath the earth. The sun dipped low behind the hills, and Willow Valley shifted from gold to gray. The quiet that followed was uneasy, the kind that settled after danger but before safety. The air smelled of rain and engine oil as Ethan Cole stood by his old pickup, wiping sweat and dirt from his hands. On the porch of the Whitfield house, Sarah sat beside her son Noah, still shaken, clutching a chipped mug of tea like it might steady her heart. Rex paced near the steps, sniffing the boards where the men had stood earlier. The prints were still there, muddy, deep, fresh. The tire tracks led away toward the main road, vanishing into the dusk. Ethan turned the metal fragment over in his hand again. Redwood Energy Corp. The paint was new, the edges clean. These weren't drifters or petty thieves, they were hired, organized. He looked back at Sarah. Her auburn hair, damp with sweat and fear, clung to her cheeks. She was trying to be calm for Noah's sake, but her hands trembled slightly whenever the boy wasn't watching. "They won't stop," she said finally, voice low. "It's been letters for months now. Then men like that showing up, always different faces, same threat. Daniel, my husband, he used to say Redwood would swallow this valley one farm at a time." Ethan leaned against the porch post. He was right about that. She looked up at him then, really looking for the first time since the attack. His face was weathered, his eyes a shade between steel and storm, but what caught her most was the quiet steadiness behind them. A man who had seen worse and still stood his ground. "Why would they want my land?" she asked. "It's small. We barely make enough to pay taxes." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stared past her, toward the silhouette of the hills beyond Willow Lake. The wind had picked up, rustling the barley in soft waves. "Because it's not about the land," he said at last. "It's about what's under it." Before Sarah could reply, a pair of headlights appeared on the dirt road, cutting through the evening haze. A patrol car pulled into the drive, the red and blue lights briefly flashing before dying out. The door opened, and Deputy Cole Ward stepped out, adjusting his hat against the wind. Ward was in his early 40s, a solid man with tired eyes and the kind of beard that looked like it had been forgotten rather than grown. His uniform was clean but worn at the seams, and a faded photo of 2 children peeked from his wallet clip. He walked with a slight limp, an old injury from their Army days that Ethan knew too well. "Evening," Ward said, his tone caught somewhere between formal and familiar. "Got a call about an assault." Ethan crossed his arms. 3 men, black jackets, truck with a Redwood logo. Ward's jaw tightened. "You sure about that?" "I've got the proof," Ethan said, tossing him the metal shard. Ward turned it over under the porch light, his eyes narrowing. "This could have come off any truck, Ethan. Not one that just tried to beat a woman into signing papers." Ward sighed. "I'll write it up, but you know how this goes. The sheriff answers to the county board, and half that board's in Redwood's pocket. I can file a report, but nothing'll come of it." Sarah stood, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "So that's it? They can send men to my door, and you just look the other way." Ward looked pained. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but without witness statements, vehicle ID, and a warrant, I can't—" "I'll give you all 3, Ethan cut in. "And if you won't take it to the sheriff, I will." Ward met his gaze. There was a long, heavy pause. the kind that only happens between two men who had once trusted each other with their lives. "You don't want this fight, Ethan," Ward said softly. "Redwood's not just a company anymore. They've got money, lawyers, private security, the kind that doesn't wear badges." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "I don't like bullies. Never did." Ward exhaled, the lines on his face deepening. "You've still got that old fire in you. I wish I could say the same." He handed back the metal shard, nodded once to Sarah, then turned toward his car. "Lock your doors tonight," he said. "And Ethan, stay out of this one. I've got kids to feed. I can't afford to lose my badge over ghosts." When the patrol car disappeared down the road, silence returned. Sarah sank back onto the steps, shoulders shaking. Noah had fallen asleep against her side, exhaustion and fear finally giving way to sleep. Rex rested beside them, head on his paws. Ethan watched the horizon, where lightning flickered faintly behind the hills. The wind carried a smell of distant rain and something else, metallic, heavy, wrong. Sarah broke the silence. "You and Deputy Ward, you served together." Ethan nodded. "Iraq. He saved my life once. Back then, we were both good at not following orders." She managed a faint smile. "What happened to change that?" "Life," Ethan said simply. "And bills." She looked at him for a moment, as if weighing the truth in that answer. "You think they'll come back?" He met her gaze. "Yes." Sarah swallowed hard. "Then why are you still here?" Ethan glanced at Rex, whose eyes glowed faintly in the porch light. "Because he heard something before I did," he said, "and I've learned to trust him." Sarah's lips parted slightly, as if to reply, but no words came. She only nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You can stay here tonight," she said finally, "at least until morning." "I'll keep watch from the truck," Ethan replied. "You get some rest." She hesitated. "You don't have to." He looked at her, then at Noah, asleep against her shoulder. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I do." When she went inside, Ethan sat on the porch steps, the pipe he'd taken from one of the attackers resting across his knees. Rex lay beside him, ears flicking at every sound. The air cooled quickly. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. Ethan's eyes scanned the dark road, muscles still coiled, his mind replaying the day. Redwood, a widow, a valley full of people too afraid to speak. It wasn't a war zone, but it felt the same helpless quiet before something worse. Rex shifted, resting his head on Ethan's boot. Ethan reached down absently, scratching behind his ear. "Good work today, soldier," he murmured. The dog's tail thumped once against the porch. Ethan leaned back, listening to the rain. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about escape or the past. He was thinking about the sound of a woman's voice calling for help, and the fact that for once he'd been close enough to answer. Thunder rolled again, closer now. Somewhere in that sound, Ethan felt the beginning of something he hadn't allowed himself in a long time: purpose. 2 days passed since the night of the attack. The valley had gone back to its deceptive calm, sunlight spilling over the barley fields as if nothing had ever disturbed them. But the quiet, Ethan knew, was only a mask. Beneath the stillness, something was stirring. He spent the morning tightening the hinges on Sarah's back door, fixing the lock that had splintered during the fight. The smell of sawdust and coffee filled the kitchen. Sarah Whitfield stood nearby, holding a mug in both hands, her auburn hair tied in a loose braid, her face still pale but steadier now. Noah, barefoot, knelt on the floor beside Rex, tracing circles in the dog's thick fur. "You didn't have to do all this," Sarah said, her voice softer than usual. Ethan didn't look up from the hinge. It was broken. She hesitated. That doesn't mean it's your responsibility. He set down the screwdriver, wiped his hands on a rag, and finally met her gaze. Everything around here's connected, Sarah. You fix one thing, it keeps the rest standing. Her lips curved in a faint smile. That sounds like something Daniel would have said. Ethan paused. He'd heard her mention her husband before, but never like this. His name spoken gently, without bitterness. He was a good man? She nodded. Too good for this world. He worked for Redwood, Engineering Division. Environmental compliance, they called it. She stared into her cup, her voice lowering. 5 years ago, there was an explosion at one of their sites near the North Ridge. Official reports said it was a gas leak. But Daniel, he'd been worried for weeks before that. He said something didn't add up about the water readings near Willow Lake. That night, he stayed late at the site. He never came home. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. They never investigated? They did. Redwood ran the whole thing. The sheriff closed the file in 3 days. He felt something cold settle in his gut. And now they're buying up land around the same area. Sarah nodded. Exactly. Every farm along the northern shore. They say it's for renewable expansion, solar fields, maybe a hydro station. But Daniel once told me there's something buried beneath that lake, something they didn't want anyone to find. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the window. From here, the lake was just a shimmer beyond the barley, framed by pine and mist. It looked harmless, beautiful even. But the soldier in him recognized the pattern, secrecy disguised as progress, the same pattern he'd seen in 6 conflict zones overseas. He turned back to her. If Daniel was right, that explosion wasn't an accident. No, she said quietly. It was a cover. Outside, Rex barked suddenly, deep and sharp. Noah jumped. Ethan moved to the window. A black SUV had stopped at the edge of the road. 2 men sat inside, motionless. After a few seconds, the engine started. Again, and the car rolled away. Sarah's face went pale. They've been doing that since last week. Just sitting there. Ethan's voice hardened. They're watching to see if you'll break. Noah pressed close to his mother. Mom, are they coming back? Sarah pulled him close. Not while he's here, she said, glancing at Ethan. Ethan gave a small nod, though he didn't say it out loud. Not while I'm breathing. That afternoon, he drove into town. The sheriff's office sat beside the feed store, its flag limp in the still air. Deputy Ward was there, standing outside, smoking a cigarette. When he saw Ethan, he sighed. I figured you'd show up again. Ethan leaned against the railing beside him. You didn't tell me Daniel Whitfield died in a redwood explosion. Ward exhaled slowly. I didn't think it mattered. It does now. That explosion ties to the land they're buying. Ward flicked ash into the wind. You don't get it. They own half the county contracts, waste management, road maintenance, even the sheriff's fuel supply. You go digging into them, you'll hit bedrock made of lawyers. Ethan stared at him. You still wearing that badge for them, or for us? Ward's jaw tightened. Don't push me, Cole. You think I like this? I've got 2 kids and a mortgage that's worth less every month. Redwood signs my paycheck more than the state does. Ethan looked away. That's the problem. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the valley. Whoa. Finally, Ward said quietly, If you really want answers, talk to someone who isn't scared of losing their job. Who? He hesitated, then glanced around before lowering his voice. There's a woman, Rachel Morgan, journalist, used to work for the Tribune in Denver. She came sniffing around after Daniel's death, asking questions about Redwood's old military contracts. She disappeared for a while. Word is, she's back in town. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Where can I find her?" "Probably the cafe by the lake. She's staying at her aunt's place. Don't tell her I sent you." "I won't," Ethan said, though both knew he would. Before leaving, he added, "Ward, if this thing goes south, I'll make sure your kids grow up in a town that's still safe to drink from." Ward's face softened just for a heartbeat. "You always did like making promises no sane man would keep." Ethan climbed into his truck and drove north, following the road that wound along the lake's edge. The water glimmered dully under the fading sun, dark and glassy. He parked near the shoreline, where Rex jumped out and began sniffing through the reeds. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, kneeling beside him. The soil near the waterline was damp, blacker than it should have been. He dug a little with his pocket knife, and there it was, buried shallow beneath the mud. A rusted metal fragment. He pulled it free. The object was heavy, old, stamped with worn letters that read, U.S. Army Corps, 1944. Ethan turned it over, heart thudding. A military artifact on a supposedly clean energy site. He brushed away more dirt and noticed the metal's edge was warped, almost melted. That meant heat, intense, unnatural. He pocketed the fragment, stood, and looked out across the lake. The reflection of the setting sun rippled across the surface, red and gold like fire. For the first time, he realized Daniel Whitfield hadn't just been killed. He'd been silenced. As he walked back to the truck, Rex stopped suddenly and began digging again, barking low. Ethan knelt, expecting another fragment, but what he found instead was worse. The soil beneath the grass was faintly warm, and when he brought his hand close, he caught the unmistakable whiff of something metallic and burnt, tinged with chemical rot. He stood slowly, his breath tight. "They're not cleaning the past," he muttered. "They're burying it." The sky darkened as he drove home. The first drops of rain hit the windshield, small at first, then harder. By the time he reached the Whitfield farm, night had fallen. Sarah was waiting on the porch, arms crossed against the cold. "Did you find something?" she asked. Ethan opened his palm. The metal fragment glinted under the porch light. "Proof," he said, "and a problem bigger than both of us." Sarah looked at him, fear flickering beneath her calm. "What do we do?" Ethan gazed out into the dark, where the lake shimmered unseen beyond the trees. "We start by finding out who else still remembers what's under that water." Thunder rumbled across the valley, and somewhere far off, a single light flickered near the lake's northern ridge, like an eye watching, waiting. 3 days later, the sky above Willow Valley burned red with sunset. It should have been a peaceful evening, the kind where smoke from kitchen chimneys drifted slow and harmless into the fading light. But there was tension in the air, sharp and electric, the kind that made old dogs restless and men check their locks twice. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of his field, sleeves rolled up, the hum of his tractor fading behind him. Rex trotted nearby, tail sweeping low, nose close to the soil, as if reading messages the earth itself had left behind. The last few days had been quiet, too quiet. The black SUV hadn't returned, and yet the silence felt wrong, like the pause before a shot. He glanced toward the Whitfield farm, barely visible through the trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, and faintly he could hear laughter, Noah's voice, clear and high. It made him smile, though he'd never admit it aloud. The peace lasted exactly 3 minutes. Rex froze, ears pricking, then gave a short, sharp bark, the kind that meant danger. Ethan followed his gaze. A dark column of smoke was rising, too thick, too black to be from a stove. It came from the direction of the Whitfield barn. "Go!" Ethan shouted. Rex took off instantly, sprinting across the field. Ethan ran after him, heart hammering, the earth thudding beneath his boots. By the time he reached the fence line, the flames were already visible, roaring orange and gold, climbing the wooden walls like living things. The barn's roof groaned under the heat, beams crackling. "Sarah!" Ethan yelled. "Noah!" There was no answer, only the furious hiss of fire and the frightened cries of animals inside. He didn't stop to think. He pulled off his jacket, covered his mouth, and ran straight into the inferno. The heat slammed into him like a physical force. Smoke bit his eyes, tearing them raw. Inside, through the chaos of flame and sound, he heard a cough, small, desperate. "Noah!" "Here!" a voice shouted from the far corner. Ethan could barely see the boy, crouched behind a fallen beam, his face streaked with soot. The roof above them creaked dangerously. Ethan charged forward, grabbed the beam, and heaved. The muscles in his shoulders screamed, but the wood shifted just enough for Noah to crawl free. He scooped the boy into his arms and ran for the door, but the way out was blocked, a wall of fire collapsing into the aisle. "Ethan!" Through the smoke, Sarah's voice rang out from outside the barn. "Get down!" Ethan shouted. He turned, scanning the back wall. And there, through the haze, he saw a narrow window half buried in hay. He kicked at the boards, once, twice, until they gave way. The cold air rushed in, filling his lungs with pain and relief at once. He shoved Noah through the gap first, then climbed after him. Rex was there, barking wildly, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. She grabbed Noah the second he was clear, holding him tight. Then Ethan staggered out, coughing, his clothes smoldering. He fell to his knees in the mud as the barn behind him collapsed in a storm of sparks. For a long moment there was only the sound of rain beginning to fall and the crackle of dying fire. Sarah was crying, silent, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep. Noah clung to her, his small body trembling. Rex sat beside them, panting hard, his fur singed at the edges, but eyes alert. Ethan pulled himself upright, chest heaving. "Anyone else inside?" She shook her head. "No, just the animals. The feed, the tools, everything." The last of the roof gave way with a groan, sending a shower of embers into the night. The glow lit Sarah's face, pale, streaked with tears and soot. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why us? Why now?" Ethan looked at the footprints near the barn's edge, heavy, fresh, already filling with rainwater. He didn't need to guess who had left them. "Because you said no." She covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan. They took my husband. Now this. What's left?" Ethan stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. His voice was rough, but steady. "You still have your boy. And this land. You don't let anyone take that from you." Her eyes met his, full of grief and fear. And something else, fragile but alive. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen what happens when you stop fighting," he said, "and I'm not letting it happen again." For a moment the only sound was the rain. Then she nodded slowly. Ethan turned toward the fire once more. The barn was gone, reduced to a skeleton of black beams glowing red at the edges. He knew the message behind it, intimidation, a warning. But all it did was harden something inside him. Headlights appeared in the distance. The sheriff's trucks, late as always. Deputy Ward climbed out first, shouting orders to the volunteers who'd arrived with hoses and buckets. When he saw Ethan and Sarah, his face tightened. "Jesus, Cole, are you trying to get yourself killed?" Ethan's voice was flat. "You going to write this one up as an accident too?" Ward winced. "You think I don't know who did this? I can't touch them without a warrant." "Then find one." Ward rubbed his forehead, rain streaking the grime from his skin. "Redwood's too powerful. I've got maybe 2 men willing to back me, and both would lose their pensions by morning." Ethan stepped forward until their faces were inches apart. "Then I'll do it myself." Ward stared at him for a long second, then sighed. "You always did like impossible odds." He turned away, voice low. "Watch your back, Cole. They'll come for you next." Ethan didn't answer. He watched the sheriff's men finish dousing the flames, then left without another word. Later, when the trucks were gone and the night had gone quiet again, Ethan helped. Sarah set up a tarp shelter beside the remains of the barn. The rain had softened to drizzle, whispering against the canvas. Sarah sat beside a small lantern, Noah asleep in her lap, his face peaceful despite the chaos. Rex lay close, one paw resting protectively near the boy's hand. His ears flicked every few seconds, but his eyes were half closed. Ethan sat opposite Sarah, the lantern light painting lines across his face. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "You've done enough." He shook his head. "Not until I find out who lit that fire." Her eyes softened. "You really mean that?" "Yeah," he said. "I've got nothing else that needs me right now." For a moment neither spoke. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet ash and burnt wood. Sarah looked down at Noah, brushing his hair gently. "He's all I have left." Ethan's gaze lingered on the boy, then on her. "That's enough reason to fight," he said. She looked up, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. Two people standing at the edge of loss, finding something unspoken in the wreckage. Outside, the clouds broke just enough for the moon to shine through. It cast pale silver light across the valley, across the smoldering ruins, and onto the two figures sitting close beside the fire's ghost. It was there, in that fragile quiet, that the promise was made, not with words, but with resolve. A soldier who had nothing left to save, and a woman who had lost everything but hope. Together they would stand against what was coming. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of morning that smelled of wet ash and unanswered questions. Smoke still curled from the ruins of the Whitfield barn, rising into the pale sky like a prayer that would never reach heaven. Ethan Cole stood near the blackened beams, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the wreckage. Sarah was inside the house with Noah, trying to make breakfast on a camping stove someone from town had lent her. She hadn't said much since the fire. Neither had he. There wasn't anything left to say that the smoke hadn't already whispered. Rex, bandaged from minor burns, paced near the porch, tail low but alert. Every now and then he lifted his head and sniffed the air, still searching for the scent of the men who'd done this. Ethan watched him for a moment, then turned toward his truck. It was time to take the evidence to town. The drive into Willow Valley was quiet. Fields rolled past in muted colors, the storm clouds from the night before hanging low and heavy. The town itself looked half asleep. Wooden storefronts, faded paint, the same faces he'd seen 100 times at the diner or gas station. But today, when he stepped out of the truck, conversations stopped. Eyes followed him. A few nodded politely. Most looked away. He walked into the sheriff's office, boots echoing on the worn tile. Deputy Ward was there, slouched behind his desk, paperwork stacked high around him. He looked up when Ethan entered, his expression a mix of fatigue and guilt. "I thought I'd see you," Ward said. Ethan dropped a folder on the desk, photographs of the fire, the footprints, and the same metal fragment he'd found before. "You want proof?" "There it is." Ward flipped through the photos, frowning. "You took these yourself?" "I did, and if you don't file them, I will." Ward rubbed his temples. "Ethan, you're not hearing me. The sheriff's hands are tied. The county board owns stakes in Redwood. Hell, they fund the fire department's trucks." Ethan's voice was calm, too calm. "So what? You'll just let them burn people out of their homes?" "I've got kids," Ward said quietly. "You think I don't lie awake, wishing it was different?" Ethan leaned over the desk, eyes hard. "Then make it different." For a moment the two men stared at each other, old loyalty and new resentment caught between them. Then Ward looked away. "If you're smart, Cole, you'll leave this alone. Redwood's not just after land. They're after whatever's under it. And if they think you know too much, I'm not the one hiding," Ethan said, turning to go. Ward's voice followed him out. "Just remember, silence keeps you alive in this town." Ethan stopped at the door. "Yeah, that's what everyone keeps telling me." Then he left. The diner across the street was half empty. Coffee brewed thick in the air, and the smell of fried bacon clung to the walls. Maribel, the owner, a round woman with kind eyes and a permanent apron, poured Ethan a cup without asking. "You're a brave fool, Mr. Cole," she said quietly. "People around here stopped poking the bear a long time ago." He took a sip. "Maybe it's time someone woke it up." A soft voice came from the next booth. "You always did like impossible odds." Ethan looked up. A woman sat with her back to the window, auburn hair curling damply around her collar. Her gray-green eyes studied him with a mix of recognition and caution. Rachel Morgan. He'd seen her name in Daniel Whitfield's old case notes that Ward mentioned. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Ethan gestured to the seat across from him. "You've been following me." She smiled faintly. "You've been making noise. Hard not to notice." He looked at her hands, ink-stained, a small scar near her thumb, the mark of someone who'd handled both notebooks and danger. "You worked with Daniel," he said. She nodded. 5 years ago. He reached out to me when he realized Redwood wasn't what it claimed to be. Said they were dumping waste under the lake, using the hydro plant as a front. I tried to publish what he found, but the Tribune buried the story. Redwood's lawyers made sure of it. Ethan leaned in. "You think his death was connected?" "I know it was." Rachel slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything I've collected since. Redwood's internal memos, old military blueprints, soil samples. It's all here. But we need proof. On camera. In real time. Something they can't bury." Ethan turned the drive in his hand. "That's a dangerous game." She smiled without humor. "I stopped playing safe the day Daniel died." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. Outside, the wind pushed dust across the street. Rachel spoke again, quieter. "I heard about the fire. I'm sorry. Sarah doesn't deserve this." Ethan's eyes softened. "No, she doesn't." Rachel hesitated, then said, "You care about her." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window, where rain began to fall again, soft and steady. "She's been through enough. I'm just making sure it stops here." Rachel nodded. "Then we help each other. You get me inside Redwood's site near the lake, and I'll make sure the world knows what's buried there." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "But if this goes wrong, there won't be time for second chances." She smiled, though her eyes were serious. "I've already run out of first ones." That evening, Ethan returned to the Whitfield farm. The rain had turned to mist, wrapping the valley in pale silver. Sarah was on the porch repairing a cracked picture frame. The photo inside showed her, Daniel, and a much younger Noah, the kind of picture people kept not because it was perfect, but because it was real. She looked up when Ethan approached. "How bad?" He hesitated, then said, "Worse than I thought." She nodded as if she already knew. "Ward won't help, will he?" "No, but I found someone who might." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who?" "Rachel Morgan. She worked with Daniel." At the sound of her husband's name, Sarah froze. "I remember her. Daniel said she was the only journalist he trusted." "She still is," Ethan said. Sarah exhaled, her voice trembling. "If you're right about what Redwood's hiding, it's not just my farm in danger. It's the whole valley." Ethan looked out toward the lake, its surface barely visible in the dusk. "Then it's time someone broke the silence." Noah appeared in the doorway, holding Rex's leash. "Mom, can I take him out?" Sarah smiled weakly. "Just around the porch, sweetheart." As the boy stepped into the mist with Rex, Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him. Despite everything, the fire, the fear, the silence, there was still life here. The laughter of a child, the rustle of a dog's paws, the faint light in a widow's eyes. Sarah watched him for a moment, then said softly, "You're staying again tonight?" He nodded. "I'll take the truck. Keep an eye on the road." She hesitated, then reached out, resting her hand briefly on his arm. "Ethan." "Thank you." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This isn't over." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But for the first time, it feels like we're not alone." The mist thickened, swallowing the sound of distant thunder. Somewhere beyond the hills, the truth waited, buried beneath a lake, under years of lies. And in the quiet heart of Willow Valley, the silence was finally beginning to crack. The storm came early that night, rolling over Willow Valley with the fury of something ancient. The first gusts rattled the windows of the Whitfield farmhouse, and the thunder cracked like artillery over the distant hills. Rain swept sideways across the fields, flattening the barley, drumming against the tin roof like fists demanding to be let in. Inside, Ethan Cole sat at the kitchen table, his Carhartt jacket draped across the chair, studying a map Rachel had spread open between them. Sarah Whitfield was upstairs tucking Noah into bed. Rex lay near the door, ears flicking at every rumble outside. Rachel's finger traced a point on the map near Willow Lake. "Here," she said. "That's where the trucks have been going every few nights, the northern ridge. It used to be part of the old Army logistics compound. Daniel mentioned it in his notes before he died." Ethan leaned closer. The rain hissed harder, blurring the world outside into gray. "How do we get in?" "I have an access code," Rachel said, pulling a laminated card from her jacket. "Daniel sent it before he disappeared. It should open the secondary tunnel gate. If Redwood's moving those barrels tonight like I think they are, this might be our only chance to catch them on record." Ethan studied her face. Beneath the determined look in her eyes, there was fear. Not the kind that froze you, but the kind that made you act. "You sure you want to do this?" She smiled faintly. "I wouldn't have come back to Willow Valley if I didn't." Before Ethan could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're not going out there in this weather." Ethan looked up. "I have to." Sarah stepped closer, the lantern light catching the worry in her green eyes. "You've already done enough. They burned my barn, not yours. You don't owe me this." He shook his head slowly. "This isn't about owing. It's about finishing something that should have ended years ago." Her voice broke a little. "And what if you don't come back?" He met her gaze for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then at least my last mistake won't be standing still." The words hung between them like thunder. Rachel closed her notebook, glancing between them. "We leave in 10 minutes." Ethan nodded, grabbed his jacket, and slung his old Army field bag over his shoulder. Rex stood immediately, tail stiff, ready. Sarah caught Ethan's arm as he passed. "Be careful," she whispered. He gave a small, tired smile. "I always try." They drove north through the storm, the wipers beating frantically against the windshield. The headlights cut through walls of rain and mist, revealing the black outlines of pine trees whipping in the wind. The dirt road turned slick, tires spinning in the mud. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. Rachel clutched the camera to her chest. "You sure we're not too late?" "We'll know soon enough," he said. When they reached the ridge, the scene below them glowed faintly through the storm. Floodlights, vehicles, men in dark raincoats unloading steel barrels into a concrete shaft. The wind carried the distant clang of metal against stone. Rachel exhaled. "There it is, proof." Ethan parked the truck behind a fallen tree. They moved on foot, crouching low, slipping through the mud and brush. Rex padded silently beside him, his fur plastered flat from the rain. When they reached the edge of the work site, Ethan counted 7 men, maybe 8, all armed. The barrels bore the yellow and black radiation symbol, their sides slick with rainwater. A supervisor shouted orders over the noise of the storm. Rachel began recording, the red light on her camera blinking faintly in the dark. "Got it," she whispered. "We need to get closer." Ethan nodded. "Stay low." They crept along the edge of a trench, feet sinking in the wet clay. The smell of fuel and ozone stung the air. When Ethan looked up again, he froze. Someone was standing behind them, the faint shape of a man in a sheriff's poncho, face hidden by the shadow of his hat. "Drop the camera," the man said. Ethan's stomach turned. "Ward." Deputy Cole Ward stepped closer, rain streaming down his face. His shotgun hung low but ready. His expression was somewhere between shame and resolve. "I told you to stay out of this, Ethan." Rachel's voice trembled. "You're with them?" Ward's jaw worked. "I didn't have a choice. They've got my kids on their payroll, insurance, schooling. If I cross them, I lose everything." Ethan took a slow step forward, rain dripping from the brim of his jacket. "You just traded your soul for a paycheck." Ward's eyes glistened with something like pain. "You don't understand. This town can't fight them." "Then maybe it needs someone who still remembers how," Ethan said. Ward raised the shotgun higher. "Don't make me do this." Rex growled low, stepping in front of Ethan. "Put it down, Ward," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You're not a killer." Ward hesitated, his hands trembling. But before he could answer, another voice rang out over the storm, smooth, cold, commanding. "Deputy Ward doesn't decide anything anymore." From the shadows, a group of armed men emerged, dressed in black tactical raincoats. Their leader stepped forward, a tall woman in a tailored gray coat, her dark hair pinned back, face pale and sharp in the lightning flashes. Miranda Vale, Regional Director of Redwood Energy. She smiled thinly. "Mr. Cole, you've been quite the inconvenience." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "You're poisoning this valley." She tilted her head. "I'm saving it. From itself. The military left this mess buried under Willow Lake 70 years ago. We're cleaning it up. Profitably." Rachel shouted over the rain. "You're burying radioactive waste beneath people's homes." Miranda's smile didn't waver. "Semantics." She nodded to her men. "Take them." Before Ethan could move, 2 guards rushed him. He swung once, dropping one to the mud, but the other struck him hard with the rifle stock. He fell to his knees. Rex lunged, teeth sinking into a guard's sleeve, but a stun baton cracked against his side, and he yelped, collapsing beside Ethan. "Don't hurt the dog," Ward yelled, but no one listened. Ethan tried to stand, fury burning through the pain. "Ward," he rasped, "you can still stop this." Ward's face twisted. "I can't." Miranda stepped closer, eyes glinting. "You'll understand soon enough. This valley belongs to Redwood now." Her men bound Ethan's wrists with zip ties, dragged him to his feet, and shoved him toward a waiting truck. Rachel tried to reach for her camera, but one of the guards smashed it under his boot. The red light went out. Ward stood motionless, rain plastering his uniform to his body, the shotgun hanging limply in his hand. When Ethan passed him, their eyes met. 2 soldiers who'd fought on the same side once, now divided by fear. "You're burying your own town," Ethan said through clenched teeth. Ward looked away. "I know." The truck door slammed. The engine roared to life. As they pulled away, lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled over the hills like judgment. Ethan caught one last glimpse of the lake through the blur of rain, dark, endless, reflecting the storm above it. He felt blood trickle from the side of his head where the rifle had struck him. The last thing he heard before everything went black was Rex's faint, broken whine. When consciousness returned, the world was still rain and darkness. Ethan lay on the floor of an old shed, wrist bound, head throbbing. A single lantern flickered beside him, casting light over the rusted tools and puddles gathering on the dirt floor. The storm still raged outside, slamming wind against the tin roof. He shifted, wincing. His shoulder screamed with pain, but the zip ties began to give under the pressure of a sharp nail protruding from the wall. Somewhere beyond the storm, he thought he heard it. Faint, distant but real. A bark. "Rex!" The sound came again, sharper this time, followed by the echo of gunfire in the distance. Ethan's pulse quickened. The soldier in him, the one he had tried to bury, was awake now. He tore the ties loose, wiped the blood from his face, and looked toward the door. The rain pounded harder, as if daring him to move. He stood slowly, muscles stiff, eyes burning with resolve. "You picked the wrong man to bury," he muttered. Then he stepped out into the storm. The rain had turned to sleet by the time Ethan Cole broke free. The door of the old shed creaked open under his shoulder, and the night hit him like a wall of ice. The storm howled across the fields, bending the trees, flooding the roads, tearing through the valley like it meant to erase it from the map. Lightning burned the sky white. Somewhere in the distance, gunfire cracked, brief, sharp, and desperate. Ethan stumbled into the mud, breathing hard. His wrists bled where the zip ties had bitten deep. His body screamed with exhaustion, but his mind was clear, focused. He could hear Rex barking, faint but steady, coming from the direction of the ridge. That was enough. He found a rusted crowbar near the shed door and started moving. The rain turned the ground slick, and every step felt heavier than the last, but he pushed through, following the flashes of light that flickered across the horizon. When he reached the edge of the old military compound, the storm had swallowed the world in gray. The floodlights that had glared so bright before were now fractured, broken by the wind. Trucks were still there, black silhouettes against the rain, their engines running as men scrambled to load the last of the steel barrels into the underground vault. The smell of fuel and burning plastic stung the air. And near the center of it all, tied to a post beside one of the trucks, was Rex. His fur was matted, his body shaking, but his eyes, those fierce amber eyes, lit up when they found Ethan through the chaos. "Good boy," Ethan muttered, crouching low. "Hold on." He moved through the shadows, using the trucks for cover. One of the guards passed by, yelling into a radio. Ethan waited until he turned, then struck. One hard blow with the crowbar. The man dropped. Another came running. Ethan swept his legs, took his weapon, and fired twice. Clean, controlled. The storm swallowed the noise. He reached Rex and sliced the rope with the knife he'd stolen. The dog pressed against him, whining, tail thumping weakly. "You're all right," Ethan said. "We're not done yet." They moved toward the main tunnel entrance, the same one he and Rachel Morgan had seen earlier. The heavy steel gate stood open, its interior glowing with pale light. Inside, voices echoed, Rachel's among them. "Please, you don't have to do this." Ethan froze. He recognized the other voice instantly. Miranda Vale, calm even in the storm. "You think the world cares, Ms. Morgan?" Miranda said. "They'll watch your footage for 2 minutes, cry for one, then forget. Progress doesn't wait for tears." Ethan moved forward silently, slipping behind a stack of barrels. Inside the tunnel, Rachel was on her knees, wrists bound, camera broken beside her. Miranda stood a few feet away, coat whipping in the wind, flanked by 2 guards. Behind them, the concrete pit glowed faintly blue, the radiation barrels being lowered into their resting place. and on the platform above them stood Deputy Ward, face pale, soaked to the bone, shotgun in hand. Ethan's pulse quickened. Ward's eyes flickered between Miranda and Rachel, his hands shaking. "Finish it," Miranda ordered. "You wanted your family safe? Earn it." Ward raised the shotgun, but his voice trembled. "This isn't what I signed up for." "Then make a choice," Miranda snapped. "Either her or them." Lightning split the air. Ethan stepped out of the shadows. "You already made that choice, Ward." Everyone turned. Miranda's eyes widened. Rachel gasped. "Ethan!" she shouted. Before anyone could move, Ethan fired, a clean shot that shattered the light above the tunnel. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Chaos erupted. Rex charged forward, tackling one of the guards. Ward fired upward, hitting the second. Sparks flew from the exposed cables. Miranda ducked behind a crate, shouting orders. "Kill him!" Ethan fired again, grazing a guard's shoulder. He grabbed Rachel, cutting her restraints, then turned toward Ward. "Get her out." Ward hesitated. "What about you?" Ethan reloaded. "I'll cover." But Miranda wasn't running anymore. She stood near the control console, her pale face lit by the red emergency lights. Her hand hovered over a lever marked Flood Valve Control. "You can't stop this," she said, voice steady. "This whole site's rigged. I'll drown the evidence, and you with it." "Then we drown together," Ethan growled. He raised his gun, but she pulled the lever first. A siren wailed. Water burst through the lower tunnels with a roar, churning with mud and debris. The ground shook. Rachel screamed, clutching Ward's arm as he dragged her toward the exit. "Ethan, move!" He didn't. He sprinted toward Miranda, slamming her back against the console. The gun went off, one shot echoing loud. Miranda stumbled, a bloom of red spreading across her coat. Her eyes went wide, then she crumpled. Ethan grabbed the control lever, fighting against the pressure. The metal burned his palms, but he forced it back halfway, slowing the flood enough to buy them seconds. "Go!" he shouted. Ward turned back, eyes wide. For the first time in years, he looked like the man Ethan had known, the one who didn't walk away. "Not without you." A beam fell from above, striking Ward's shoulder. He fell to his knees, blood pouring from the wound. Ethan rushed forward, catching him. "Don't you dare die here." Ward gave a strained laugh. "You always were the stubborn one." "Shut up and move," Ethan snapped, dragging him toward the exit, but Ward pushed him away. "Get them out," he said, voice faint. "I'll hold it." "Ward?" The deputy looked up, rain mixing with the blood on his face. "Tell my kids. I tried to do the right thing, one last time." Before Ethan could answer, Ward turned, fired his last shot. At the collapsing roof, bringing down a concrete slab that blocked the flood for a moment. Enough time for Ethan, Rachel, and Rex to escape. When they reached the tunnel mouth, the pressure wave hit behind them. A roar of water and dust that swallowed the compound in an explosion of sound. Ethan collapsed on the hillside, gasping for breath, rain pelting his face. Rachel knelt beside him, shaking, her eyes glistening. "Ward?" Ethan looked back at the ruined tunnel, the water surging out like a beast unleashed. "He's gone." For a moment no one spoke. Then, slowly, Rachel raised her camera. Its backup lens cracked but still recording. "He didn't die for nothing," she whispered. By dawn, the storm had broken. The valley lay still under a sky washed clean, pale gold spilling across the fields. News spread fast. Within 24 hours, Rachel's footage hit every major outlet: the hidden vault, the barrels, Ward's final stand. By the end of the week, federal investigators arrived. The Redwood Energy logo came down from every building it owned. Arrest warrants followed. The silence that had ruled Willow Valley for years was finally broken. A month later, spring came early. The barley grew green again. At the Whitfield farm, A new barn stood where the old one had burned. Sarah was out front planting herbs beside the porch. Her hands were still rough, her clothes simple, but there was peace in her movements now. The peace of someone who had survived the fire and learned to breathe again. Noah laughed as he chased Rex across the yard, the dog's tail wagging furiously. Ethan leaned against the truck, watching them, the faintest smile on his weathered face. Sarah looked up and walked toward him, brushing soil from her hands. "You should stay for supper," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You don't need me hovering anymore." She smiled. "That's not what I asked." He hesitated, then nodded. As they walked toward the porch, she stopped and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, grounding. "You didn't just save us," she said softly. "You saved this land." Ethan looked out at the shimmering fields, the glint of sunlight off the water in the distance. "No," he said quietly, "it saved me." Rex barked once, chasing a butterfly that drifted through the new grass. Sarah laughed, the sound bright, real, alive. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds. The air smelled of rain and earth, of life beginning again. For the first time in a long time, Willow Valley was quiet, not the silence of fear, but the kind that comes after redemption. And as Ethan watched the horizon turn gold, he realized he no longer needed to run from the ghosts of the past. Because here, in this valley reborn, he had finally come home. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or light from the sky. They come quietly, through people who refuse to give up when everything else is lost. Ethan didn't find God in a church or on a battlefield. He found him in a burning barn, in a child's cry, in a dog that came back through the rain. He found him in a valley that refused to die, because faith, once planted, never truly burns away. And maybe that's the message for us all. That even in the storms of our lives, when the world feels heavy, when hope feels distant, God is still working. Not always to stop the fire, but sometimes to send someone through it, so others can be saved. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles still happen, not just in holy places, but in broken hearts, in quiet valleys, in people like you. Leave a comment with your prayer tonight. Let's fill this space with light, not silence. And if you believe that every soul deserves a second chance, hit subscribe, join our community, and help us keep telling stories that remind the world no storm lasts forever, but God's love does.